Yes, what were we talking about?
Talking about cultural penetration,
Cultural penetration.
sexual penetration.
Um, yeah, so where were we? Yeah, we're talking about basically like what would it take to get the new Decadent manifestos into the hands of Peter Thiel or something, right? Or not necessarily Peter Thiel, but
Right?
just as what you're explaining to me essentially is that the goal is not necessarily for like grassroots adoption of a particular movement or set of ideas. Like with stuff like this, basically, you're trying to get these ideas into the right hands of people, right?
Yeah, I mean, I never, I definitely like don't want like a Netflix series or something. It was never really the goal. I mean, my immediate goal personally is just finish and push forward as many books as I intend to do, but I never really saw that as a particular means to like some other, like having a movie or something. And I was always quite surprised when that's what people seem to want, right? So I think there's this I mean, it does get a bit magical, I think, because there's a sense in which like what are you actually trying to do versus what do you maybe say you're doing, or what are you uh actually trying to do. And I think a lot of people, if they're honest, like they just want to be famous, or they just want to have a movie or like a Netflix series or something. Uh, so I think that approach is like, seems like the most boring to me, because
Hmm.
it's just like, well, then why are you even doing this seemingly primary activity if you're just conceiving it as like a stepping stone to something else that you'd actually much rather be doing, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to conceptualize cultural penetration outside of it being a grassroots movement.
Grassroots in what way? Like
Well,
how?
grassroots in sort of the populist way, and I don't know, like in the sense of everyday people becoming aware of your ideas
Yeah.
rather than like you're suggesting kind of top down cultural penetration
Oh yeah, because I
as the
don't,
goal.
as I said, like I don't believe we actually live in any kind of democracy in any sense.
No,
And
we don't.
the elites are, well, I mean, a certain class of elites are certainly making decisions which unilaterally making decisions that affect everyone, right?
Everyone, yeah.
Um so in my own way, I mean, I sort of see myself as being at least equal and in most cases superior to those elites.
Mm,
So I don't really see the point in pitching anything certainly below what I would consider the highest level of, artistic achievement, or some other achievement. I mean, at the end of the day, I do think things should be fun to engage with, and interesting to engage with, more or less broadly as possible. But I'm also not really looking to like just be super populist or accessible, because even to me, I mean, that seems like a very like the standard of what I guess like most people would be engaging with seems like weirdly constructed and kind of like contingent to me. So yeah, like companies and corporations are very much sculpting popular taste and very much developing it in kind of a conscious way. And you can see that if you go back in the past, again, like 100, 200 years ago, people were reading, working class people were reading often quite difficult books, and listening to, like quote unquote serious music, and all kinds of stuff. So I think it's less to do. I mean, you can certainly frame it in class terms, which I think is accurate, but I feel like what we would consider a broad appeal approach, or production or something now, probably will seem very historical and not too long, or Well, even
What do you mean
even
historical?
well, even something like films, right? Like if you go back to the 1970s, I mean, people are watching quite what today would seem like rather artistic and abstract films, that again by current standards are quite slow and thoughtful and not what we would consider necessarily like super mainstream entertainment. But
So
they
like
were,
is Taxi Driver an example of this?
well, yeah,
Or
I mean,
would you go
it's not really like, I mean, I guess it feels like if it came out now, it would just be like some indie film or something.
Yeah, yeah, I
And
mean like when I watched it a few years ago, it just seemed to be completely aimless basically.
well,
Like
that's what I mean. That's what I'm saying. But it like a lot of these films from that time period were what I think now people are looking at them as being, rather like art films or something.
right.
But I mean, a lot of them were just playing mainstream box office. So that's a recent example. But again, if you go back 100 years, I mean, people are reading. Well, like if you look at like soldiers fighting in the First World War, and they're like sitting in their trenches reading, like avant-garde poetry.
Mhm.
I mean, that seems crazy now, right? Like you're not imagining some soldier over in the Middle East now is like reading, I don't know, Ezra Pound or
I don't
something.
imagine it, but I don't imagine it in World War One either, in
But
particular.
but it
Well,
was, right, and
how widespread was it? I
like
guess, right?
really wide. Well, because again, there's no TV, there's
Mm,
no like what do you think people were doing, right? I mean,
yeah.
they're reading poetry, they're reading
Well, that
books.
was like the only kind of source of entertainment or escape,
Well, yeah,
right?
but they're also they're also pretty invested in that kind of stuff. I
Right.
mean, in the same way that like, well, like, I mean, like there's literally no difference between like rappers fighting each other over music and how seriously people took, poetry back then.
Hmm.
Well, again, including Ezra Pound, who literally defected to the Axis.
Hmm.
I mean, at least on some account of aesthetic matters or for some. So I don't think it's anything super different from what we have now in a lot of ways, but things which maybe uh, seem more front and center is maybe a bit different.
Hmm.
Well, as I just said, I mean, like how many people are really, I mean, people are still watching full length movies and films,
Hmm.
but it's maybe not as central as it once would have been, even like 20 years ago or something.
Yeah, well, I guess like the broader commentary, and I think we've talked about
Yeah.
it a few times, is just the ever decreasing attention span,
Yeah.
right? Like,
But people still are paying great attention to certain things.
mhm.
I mean, you could argue that they're not very substantial things, like TikTok or something. But they're certainly paying great
They're
attention
paying
to
a
it.
lot of
They're
attention.
putting a
Yeah,
lot of time
yeah,
into it.
yeah,
Putting incredible amounts of time into,
yeah.
Instagram videos or like
Hmm.
other TikTok videos or promotion
Hmm.
podcasts, right?
Right.
I don't know. So it's not that people aren't focusing intensely on certain artistic forms.
Hmm.
They're just maybe different forms than they were previously focusing on.
Hmm.
But it doesn't mean that full length movies are, I don't know, outdated or
Not outdated, I guess.
doomed to fail or
Yeah.
something.
But again, just like going back to cultural penetration, and
Yeah.
this spawned from we started talking before we started recording about basically like, yeah, what is the goal, I guess, of neo
Yeah.
decadence, or like how
I think in 2020 or 2019 or whatever, the goal was stated as identify sources of neo-Passéism in the local cultural environment, of each country. So originally there were people appointed to each country as like kind of like a de facto minister of culture, or like a cultural arbiter.
hmm
So they're supposed to take stock of the surrounding, situation.
or missionary, could
Yeah,
call it that
missionary.
as
Could call
well,
him a
right?
missionary. Yeah, or like a monk or something. and then react accordingly, right? And I still kind of think that is the model is still being followed.
But again, this is very grassroots oriented, kind of,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, and I think I did mention that a little bit in the discussion with this that these academics did a few days ago.
Deliberately cagey about what it was, or
I just my mind is just I'm
okay.
like, what was a
What would you
round
even
table?
call
A
it?
round
Yeah,
table or
neo-decadence
a
round
conference?
table?
I guess a conference or
Yeah.
round. I mean, I don't know if it's even a
I think round table
Round
is,
table is probably better.
yeah.
I was just blanking on the word.
Right. Okay.
But well, I mentioned, so ideally, like bypassing formal academic or pre-existing structures to have people creating things independently and directly, cross-culturally or internationally,
Right.
which again I still think is sort of a new idea in this sense, because 100 years ago, I mean, it was still very artistic movements were essentially nationalist movements. So Italian futurism is about Italian nationalism, right? And Marinetti co-wrote the manifesto of fascism with Mussolini, right? So Mussolini and Marinetti were equals in a lot of ways. And in some ways, I would say Mussolini kind of based himself on Marinetti, including his public presentation, the way he was giving speeches or presenting his ideas. Because
so Marinetti succeeded in getting his audience, basically.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, he was like a political figure,
Right.
in the sense that he was involved in Italian politics of the time. So there's that sense in which, I mean, and they tried to copy this in other countries, like the English or the British tried to copy futurism with they called it vorticism. They had their own nationalist avant movement, which I don't know, was a little bit derivative, I guess. I mean, I think they had some interesting stuff, but certainly not as distinctive as the original Italian futurists. But all these things, I mean, surrealism is basically a French movement,
right? Yeah.
Because I mean, again,
it's all pre-internet, basically, right?
Well,
so if you're trying to collaborate,
not just pre-internet, but like
pre-radio, yeah.
I mean, you can't, if you had to take a ship to get somewhere, I mean, you can't really have to send physical letters. You have to take ships. Like you can't you can't really like coordinate like fine-tuned
anyone further than a train ride away from you, right?
So these were very like, I mean, I think the weird thing is that like in the present, we tend to like sand this off or like forget this. And we just assume that like surrealism was like some global thing. And like, it sort of wasn't. I mean, it was more pretty much a French movement, Spanish, French, and futurism was very, very distinctly Italian, right? So even conceiving of like an actual, I mean, like the Situationists calls themselves the Situationist International, but even that I think was more
British, basically.
Well, I mean, they're French, right?
French.
The Situationists were French. On paper, I mean, they had like maybe one or two Danish members or something, but interestingly, I mean, Neo-Decadence has one significant Danish member too. But Situationism was international on paper, but in practice, I mean, it's just another French art movement, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't really.
But okay, so all this is to say,
well, I'm just saying that like I don't think until now, I don't think there has been like a truly cross-cultural art movement or horizontal international art movement that isn't like locally. It doesn't have like some specific central like node, I guess, geographic node. And you can say that's here. I mean, you can say Tokyo is the center of neo-decadence. I mean, I feel like it is, but at the same time, it's kind of not. I mean, because I mean, there's just as many people in the U.S. or Europe or other places. I mean, I don't think you can point to any one city or country as being like this center, right?
But that's like you could say that's a feature, or you could say that's a bug, I
Yeah.
guess, right? I mean, like, wouldn't you like to have a stronger hub of neo-decadent uh, artists in Tokyo?
Well, definitely, yeah. But
Or like the neo-decadent cafe in London, right? Like,
definitely, yeah. But
you definitely want the geographic
yeah,
hub,
and
but you want several of them as
yeah,
well.
you want several
right?
of them,
But it starts in one place.
yeah, but
Inevitably, there's a first place, right?
well, I think again, coming from the perspective of the internet, I don't feel like there necessarily was, because almost all of the founding members, well, all of them actually. I mean, everyone was in a different country, so coming from that kind of standpoint, I mean, I think the important point is developing local scenes, but in practice, they might end up being pretty different from each other.
Yeah.
And I don't think you could really designate any one as being like the central one or the main one. Whereas again, like surrealism is Paris, like situationism is Paris. Even like modernism in general, like, you know, Hemingway kind of, I mean, it's Paris, right? None of that stuff happens or functions without Paris.
Right.
And you know, there's other art scenes you could say are New York, right? Or London, right? So I mean, that I think that sense in which I'd say neo-decadence is the first one I would say that is consistent and coherent, but also completely horizontal or completely kind of cross-cultural in that sense, where there's not like a singular central local place.
Right. I wonder if it's something that comes with time, though. Like, yeah, I mean, I'm drawing a blank even on naming contemporary art movements. Like the only one I could really pull up would be like the visionary art movement.
Yeah, there's not really any.
But is that just because they're named in hindsight, basically, or identified and become culturally relevant in hindsight?
No, I mean all of these movements that were just discussed, including decadence in the 19th century, they're all very much a marketing strategy that was very self-conscious and was deliberately created that way. So there was the original decadence had a manifesto. It was a manifesto of symbolism, futurism. I mean, it's probably the first completely marketing based. Well, they even said like the art of the future is just marketing. I mean, I think that one of their manifestos says something like that, which is very prophetic, certainly. Surrealism was self-consciously created in a way that would seem kind of silly even now. I mean, you know, Breton was going around, you know, expelling people for, I don't know, having the wrong opinions and you know, kicking people out. And
but was all this happening, 6 years into the creation of it?
No, they just created this from the ground up.
Right.
They just kind of came out with it and organized it, and then, you know, started releasing things and organizing it that way. Yeah.
I see.
It seems like I do feel like it seems strange in the present, because I feel like this sort of like neoliberal kind of like CIA workshop approach has been so influential to the point where we just like take it for granted, where we're like, oh, like if you're an artist, you have to be an individual, so you shouldn't organize, right? You see the logic there?
Yeah.
So it's like you shouldn't, if you want to be completely individual and unique, then you shouldn't organize, which is a way of saying don't create anything which could threaten the status quo.
Right. Yeah.
Because if you start organizing, then you can actually get people doing things differently or thinking differently, or challenging the existing status quo, right? So I think that's a very brilliant CIA strategy to create this sort of like individualist market, which again in practice all of the so-called individuals come out sounding exactly the same, right? So I think that's the other hilarious part, is that the guild system or the workshop system produces the most blandly identical products, but everyone thinks they're an individual, right? So yeah, I mean it's a weird, I feel like it's a weird cognitive dissonance or something. So right away, anytime you try to organize, you're saying, "Oh, why do you need to do that? Like, why would you like declare some movement, or like, why would you try to organize people, or like, isn't that like mechanical? Like, why would you do things according to a plan? Which is kind of funny when you think about it, because it's like, why would you design this building according to a plan? Like, couldn't you just like improvise it, or like, like." What about your plumbing? Like, couldn't you just, kind of get some divine inspiration?
Right. Just
freehand the, toilets. Like, right. So, I mean, it sounds absurd if you apply this logic to like literally anything else.
Right.
But I mean, it's very like magical CIA logic of like why you shouldn't like organize things. But
yeah, I mean, the CIA are masters of cultural manipulation, right? I mean, I don't know if they necessarily wrote the playbook on it, but they certainly, wrote the latest editions on it.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, maybe just switching gears a bit here, like, during the Neo-Decadent Roundtable, I was also pretty amazed at how sensitive people seemed to like political topics, or like anything that has like any sort of political tone or interpretation, right? Like it was like I was
trying to generate a little bit of controversy.
You do that.
I was trying my best. I mean, again, like I didn't want to like worked. I wasn't trying to like. I did feel kind of bad. I mean, like I think I definitely appreciate that the organizers are going out of their way to like create this and like engage with it, and I do understand. I mean, that's sort of what I was saying at the end. I was like, wow, like I could not even imagine like the restrictions that you must be sort of like actually feeling, right? Like being in these positions, like what, I mean, having to, tread on thin ice and, be like so sensitive to like what political nuances or like I mean, just what you're kind of saying, right? So if anything, I'm like, wow, that sounds rough. I'm glad I don't have to deal with that. I just drop anything I want, right?
Yeah. But like also, I don't know, can you call yourself an artist if you're concerned about, I don't know, not stepping on political correctness terms, or I don't know, like, if you're worried about these, like, why are you worried about these things, right? Like, as an artist, you should be above that, right?
That's sort of what I was trying to,
like, who has time for these, Twitter arguments if you're actually trying to create anything of substance?
That's sort of is, I mean, to me, the contradiction between being an academic and being an artist, like,
is
I can't personally reconcile that contradiction, which is why I'm not an academic, right? So I can't personally. I'm sure some people can, and best of luck to them. I mean, some people are doing it, and I personally, I mean, I can't even. I think I did even say something like that. I was like, I don't. At the end of the day, like I don't really care less what anyone thinks of these things. I'm just doing it for someone's sake, right? So, I mean, whether if someone's offended or if there's if it's misinterpreted, all right, sure. But I personally think this was a question I think towards the end of the roundtable. I mean, we're getting this a little bit. What is the ultimate value of academic scholarship? I certainly don't think it should be some kind of like finishing school or like manners school for, the PMC or whatever. I think there is value in actual scholarship and of various kinds, but yeah, I mean, I definitely can't imagine creating things in like any kind of climate of fear or restriction, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, and going back to the CIA, like that, creating that climate of fear and restriction is the goal in stifling creation, right?
It's the goal, right?
So if you're worried about something sounding far right, you're playing into the CIA's playbook. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
So
exactly right.
Stop, please.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Some of us were discussing this afterwards, and like we were trying to get a handle of like what exactly is the, like, are we being perceived as too far right, or are we being perceived as too far left? Like what, like, and there's some debate about like some people thought that like,
well, that's good. You should be aiming for that,
right? Yeah.
But these are the things that actually matter is when they don't play into a clear political division.
And again, we're kind of like a few of us had different takes. Like some people thought like people might have been concerned it was coming off too far right, and some other people thought they might have been concerned it was coming off too far left, right? So I mean, and yeah, I would agree. I mean, that's I would say it's probably like a healthy situation to be in, or have some hitting on all sides, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it definitely should be that way, because if you clearly fall into a certain set of values that align nicely with the political zeitgeist, then like your movement or ideas will be a footnote in some
it does become
textbook.
It does become a footnote, and that is at the end of the day, I mean, that's my whole I'm actually compiling this like anti-Iowa University Substack post at the moment, which you can contribute, by the way.
Anti-Iowa University.
Yeah.
What's
this is a CIA funded writing program that was created in the, I think, 40s to counteract the nefarious influence of the Soviet Writers Guild, which again was organizing Russian writers in a very like organized way, right?
Mm-hmm. So what was the goal of their?
Well, again, to create kind of like the, I don't know, anti-Soviet Writers Guild.
So it's like the neoliberal like writing.
Right.
Group.
Yeah. So they're creating this. They're trying to create like an individual factory, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to churn out, well, I mean, they did this in the visual arts too. I mean, they were really big on, like Jackson Pollock and
Yeah,
because
we talked about this before.
I think we probably did talk about
like
this.
They didn't want the actual like art depicting the working man, or
they didn't want there to be like
any economic slant.
Well, like they didn't want there to be like a North American, Diego Rivera or some of these like very political realistic artists that are like actually drawing things on ground level and depicting labor unions and workers and factory. Like they didn't want anything, so they wanted to be very middle class. You go home after doing your job, you cheat on your wife, drink a martini, feel kind of bad about yourself, go to church, I don't know, watch a movie, and then that's the story, right?
Yeah.
But so nothing that so they're like, as long as it's personal, then it's artistic,
right?
But the minute it gets political, then it's propaganda, and you don't want to degrade yourself by including political content.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the approach they pushed, right? And they're funding journals about this, and they're funding university programs and writing
Yeah.
programs. I mean, like not every. I mean, sure, like if you read a lot of these Soviet books, it's like, okay, yeah, like it's like the heroic workers are building the blast furnace, and the evil capitalist Jews are blah blah blah, and and like it's a little bit silly too, right?
Mhm.
But I mean, like, so sure, I mean, you don't want to have a completely ideological political art. I mean, it can be a little bit silly too, right?
Right.
But if you totally like, if you go off in Andy Warhol land, then it's like, okay, then you sort of being a bit of a passive collaborator as well, because you're not going so out of anyone's real life that it's not really.
Yeah, it's a soup can, and
it's a soup can. And that's
colors,
the hilarious thing
right?
is like I just feel like it's so. It's like no one ever calls them on that. Like I feel like Warhol is like so above criticism, even though he's like the most classic Cold War kind of artist. Like you just like hamburgers and ketchup and soup cans. I mean, it's like, what else are you?
Yeah.
Like he wasn't criticizing that stuff. He was saying it's great. He's like, everyone drinks the same Coca-Cola. Everyone eats the same hamburgers, and capitalism is the real communion.
Right.
There's no president drinks the same Coca-Cola I do. And
Yeah.
It's that, like he wasn't criticizing it. He was saying it's great, right? So I don't know. I mean, nothing wrong with hamburger every now and then, but I don't know if that's supposed to be the extent of your
art movement,
right?
Philosophy,
The factory, as he called it.
Yeah. So okay, CIA, University of Iowa. So what's the article? What are you piecing together?
Oh, it's just the way we're gonna run this. I'm just advertising now this neo-Passéism Substack. We're just gonna like choose arbitrarily like 100 areas and kind of just collect quotes or comments on them. So even just like a quote or a comment would be enough to merit inclusion in this in these articles or whatever. Including some illustrations along the way. So we figured that we were discussing this and we're like, well, we got to start with some like comparatively easy targets, right? So Iowa University is certainly an easy easy target to attack at this point. And I mean, there's a bit of preaching to the choir with this, but it still needs to be said. I mean, it still is like the pipeline to major publishers,
right?
So it's very much like this guild, workshop to agent to publisher pipeline. Sort of, I mean, it's almost like a job interview, right? It's like you're not, if you don't have these credentials, then you're not going to get a foot in the door. You're not going to get the job, right?
Yeah.
So it's like fall in line and do things our way, or you're not going to get a deal, right? Basically, right? So it's an easy target, but it still does need to be said, and it still is such a. I feel like at this point it shouldn't have any prestige, and like people should be smart enough to see through this now.
Who has prestige from it now?
Like anyone who's published. Like if go to the bookstore, like pick up a nice looking, traditionally published literary book, and the author probably went to Iowa. Yeah, right.
I see.
So it's again, this is something that normal people probably don't even know about. But if you're aware of this, it's like grotesquely obvious, right?
Right.
Like it's just like pure cronyism and like not like guild monopoly, I guess. Like I don't know what you would even otherwise call it.
Yeah.
So it's like it's 2025. Like if you're not seeing through this by now, like I don't know what to say. I mean, yeah. So that's one of the initial targets we'll be looking at and commenting on. Again, like we're not trying to take this too seriously. Like we do want this to be kind of entertaining and amusing and funny to read.
But, and I like the collaboration with AREN Lang on this, right? For the illustrations. I thought that was a nice
Yeah, well,
touch.
he's gonna draw it, and Dan Hayer, also from Stone Church Press, is gonna probably be hopefully adding some artistic duties to it as well. So yeah, we'll be looking at we hope to get into a lot of things. Like we actually have some again, I'm just kind of advertising this now, but we do have some completed. A few people have turned in some very, very entertaining essays about there's one that Ryan Pitchford, who's a music producer, wrote about Rick Rubin,
Right.
the producer.
Yeah.
You know Rick Rubin, right?
Yeah. Well, again, I can't name what he's involved in, but I've certainly heard the name, and I'm sure I know of what
he's involved in a lot of
in.
stuff.
Yeah.
He created Def Jam Records, and he produced the Beastie Boys and Slayer, and like just all kinds of Walk This Way, Run DMC, Aerosmith, right?
Right.
So he's a very influential producer, and Ryan, who also works in the music industry as a producer, has produced this hilarious essay where he's just utterly eviscerating, ripping Rick Rubin to shreds for various reasons. It's completely hilarious. I mean, I'm really looking forward to releasing this article because I was just cracking up reading it. Again, he's very well sourced, I guess, and has a lot of inside info on this, and it's quite entertaining. So that one's coming up. Colby has one on quote unquote weird fiction, which is sort of a genre category. So yeah, there's a few standalone kind of articles or essays will be coming out that address all kinds of cultural topics. Again, not just writing or literature, but music, fashion. Hope to get some visual culture kind of stuff, films or TV kind of stuff too, which hopefully we'll have some coming up.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I like the idea is because it seems to be packaged in a way that it could just get more eyes on it.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah, and
which is important again.
Yeah, it's always good. I mean, getting actual engagement and
trying to recruit additional neo-decadent artists.
We're always welcome. I
creators,
mean, it's always like, or is a little bit on the. I'm always like, I always feel a little bit silly, like directly trying to like recruit people, but I certainly like. Everyone should certainly go ahead. Like anyone that's interested in this, like doesn't need my sanction or like doesn't like you don't have to like fill out some application form. Like it's not really like you need to go to that level. I mean, anyone that's interested in this can apply the ideas and apply the analyses and just like get started. So I guess there is that kind of like DIY element.
Right. Yeah, I mean, just the question basically, again, going back to how do you get the word out further, right?
Yeah. I'm not like, at the end of the day, I mean, if someone is in the position and they like actually want to make something like super mainstream, like I wouldn't even care. It's not something that ever really occurs to me as being super important, but if there's like if someone was like, I don't know, producing some series or movie or something, like if they're in a position to do that and that's like they're influenced enough by it, or if they think it's would translate and be worthwhile, then sure. I mean, the situationists were producing movies and stuff. They're like redubbing films and releasing these quite hilarious kind of like piss take movies of redubbing like kung fu movies. Like they're putting out some pretty funny kind of stuff for a while. I mean, I think that I don't know how much they developed it really, but
or what influence those movies ultimately
they had a lot of influence, man. I mean, there's certain like situationism is a weird one because I feel like it's like I always end up feeling like it's more influential than good, I guess, if that makes any sense. So like there wouldn't be MTV without situationism. There wouldn't be music videos without. I mean, like there's so many things that we take for granted that it influenced a lot, and kind of like there's architecture stuff that it influenced. So it's all over the place, and I think if you're just like, what situationist art would I like look at now? I mean, that's where it maybe falls down a little bit, because I don't know if they personally produced anything that was as
How did it create MTV?
well. Again, just the idea of like having very short films, using what is almost like propaganda techniques, I guess. I mean, just in the sense of like having this very like fast cutting, in your face kind of slogan type programming, including a lot of like absurd humor and like kind of randomness. I mean, it's very like situationist kind of.
It's funny because this is all like you're just going down the list of like TikTok.
Well,
right?
Yeah, but like,
so situationists created TikTok.
Could argue that, yeah,
or short form real content.
I think they probably would have gotten a kick out of it. I mean, I think like I feel like Guy Debord and like a lot of these, I feel like they would have they probably would have considered it, obviously part of the spectacle, but I think they would have probably tried to like make use of like TikTok type, media or something like. Yeah, it does have that situationist feel, I guess. So, yeah, there is kind of a direct, I guess, line of descent there. And I feel like, again, like we were talking about, penetration of influence, and certainly the people, I feel like the people that were making MTV would have been familiar with situationism, and well, like Tony Wilson, the Factory Records producer, I mean, he was like directly influenced by it and was quoting it all the time, and like produced Joy Division, created he created the Hacienda, which is the first real rave nightclub in England. That's the
this is going back to episode 1, I believe.
Connect the dots all the way back to episode 1. So there, like the Hacienda is a situationist term, right? There's I think there's like some situationist architect who said like you'll never see the Hacienda, it doesn't exist, or it has to be built or something. So Tony Wilson, once he got money from Factory Records, he was like, let's create the actual Hacienda, which is like the first nightclub where people started doing ecstasy and listening to rave music and partying in that particular way. So you could argue that situationism is responsible for rave culture too, because it sort of is. Yeah. So yeah, everything that influence, I feel like its influences are better than situationism itself in a way, if it makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's almost like the influence is the movement.
Yeah, well, the influence is the movement. Yeah. But whereas, I mean, like with surrealism, like I feel like original.
Well, there's like pieces and
I feel
productions.
I feel like the best surrealist art is much better than what it influenced, I guess. Like I would say the influence of surrealism is mostly, I don't know, like Monty Python or something. Like it's not like Dali and Ernst are certainly much better artists than most of what they influenced, I guess. But yeah,
interesting.
Not that there's anything wrong with Monty Python. I mean, it's hilarious, but don't know if it's quite on the same artistic level, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna like try and draw a weird line here, but not sure how well it will play, or it's not really fully developed here. But just going back to like political alignment in particular, like U.S. political climate in relation to art movements. So like, would you say one of the goals of neo-decadence would be to like disassemble the CIA?
Yeah, I would be happy to see that happen. Well, I guess like the CIA is an organization itself, but like more like, I guess I would say like CIA culture,
right?
Because if you really look at like the CIA is responsible for so much culture, like
Yeah.
much more than we would maybe naively think.
Yeah.
I would say has been,
Well, supposedly, like all American pop culture is basically just marionetted by
well,
influence from the CIA, right?
yeah, and I think that's kind of the amazing.
Back off the mic, just
Oh,
a
sorry,
bit.
yeah, probably eating it a bit. I think that kind of is the amazing thing is like
A bit closer,
close. Okay, yeah, we're
somewhere
in
there.
that Goldilocks
Yeah,
zone
somewhere
here,
there. Yeah.
the habitation zone. I think the amazing thing about the CIA is just like how actually like culturally productive it is,
Right.
which again you wouldn't necessarily credit it with being that, but in practice it has created a fair amount of culture that again probably most people would think is like pretty good.
Right.
And I'm not saying they're wrong, but I think we're maybe at the point where we can like look that in the eye a little bit more, or like not look past that as much as people in the past maybe would.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lost kind of. Okay, so neo-decadence to disassemble the CIA, disassemble the cultural influence it has. Yeah, I mean that.
Well, I would say that I guess to put this in like neo-decadent terms, maybe like I would say that the CIA is responsible for neo-passéism, I guess, because neo-passéism I feel like is kind of like Cold War logic pushed to its idealized end of history point of view. You know what I mean by end of you know, like the Francis Fukuyama kind of end of history idea.
But basically, you're just like it's you know, the culture ceases to shift. Basically, right?
Well,
it becomes like creations.
Well, so yeah, so as soon as the Soviet Union collapses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then it's like, well, okay, capitalism has decisively won, to the point where people are like, well, history is now over. Like it's it. So, and that's sort of where the Mark Fisher idea of what he called capitalist realism comes in, where he's like, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism at this point, or at least when he was, when he made that statement, which was about 20 years ago. So I guess like the 1990s and the post-Soviet period was this like supposed end of history period. But what that means in artistic terms is that if there's no more history, then there's no more innovation, right? Because then like, well, then what's the point of, I mean, like, does anything need to like progress really?
Well, like no art gets dated, basically. It becomes more of a consumptive media.
Well, yeah, it's a consumptive. It's like a circular medium then, right? So you just you can get
Marvel, right? It's just,
Marvel, right?
Yeah, you can Avengers over and over.
Run it over again. Right. You got we used to have, was it Nick at Night, where they would replay the TV shows from like the 60s and 50s and like I Love Lucy. They're just it's like the rerun idea, right?
Yeah.
It's like the syndication. It's perfectly automatable. Like an AI could run that. Right. You just keep looping the same channels and so that's neo-passéism, right? That's like that's basically what we use that term to describe, right?
It's the cultural slump.
It's cultural stasis, right? I mean, it's a circular remix or rerun culture, you could say. And yeah, I mean, Marvel is like the perfect obvious example. Of that. I mean, using a very Andy Warhol 1960s medium, which is the comic books, right? The Marvel comic books, which again, in their own time and place, I mean, they're quite imaginative and creative, and I certainly don't have anything bad to say about Jack Kirby, who I think everyone would agree is a genius.
So, like, I want to make a leap here. Like if you believe that cultural stasis is the enemy, I'm using the royal you, and this is basically just to include all artists, all neo-decadents. If you believe that cultural stasis is the enemy, then you should be at the very least, and if you believe the CIA is the enemy,
Yeah.
you should at the very least be intrigued by current US political developments.
Yeah.
Because like what is currently happening is not too different from an attack on the CIA or the disassembly of the CIA or the disassembly of the current power structure that has arguably existed since the 1960s or JFK assassination.
Yeah.
Like again, like I think the win here is just turbulence, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of political leanings, you should be excited that we're not in this endless, Clinton mafia regime, right? Where for, 50 years, nothing really changed, right? Like the modus operandi didn't change.
Yeah.
Like it was more wars. It was more like, spreading of democracy, spreading of neoliberal values, right? Which led to nowhere, right? Nowhere good.
Yeah, true.
But a lot of people got wicked rich off it in the process, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, like before, like I don't know, I guess try and step out of the left-right lens for a second.
I agree with that. Yeah, I agree.
I'm saying you, but like again, royal you, and again, I'm just commenting also on the Neo-Decadent Roundtable and some of the political sensitivities that I seem to notice.
I think I feel like political sensibilities, or sorry, political sense. My brain, just right here. My political sensitivities in themselves are sort of like a liability for an artist, because if you can't really look at things somewhat accurately or without prior, I don't know, allegiance or something, I feel like you're not going to have any chance of really portraying what's happening or grasping. If you try and
align yourself with any political climate, you are a neo-passéist.
Well, I would agree, right? Yeah. And so I think that's what I think that's my take on it. Well, we did kind of mention this. I mean, I would say most of my artistic influences are what would be considered, well, not even right wing. I mean, they'd be considered literally fascist, because in some cases they were. They were. Right? Not only were they fascists, but they created fascism, right? They literally created fascism, right? So, so what does that mean? I mean, does that mean that I'm saying fascism is good? Well, no, but I think there's I think we have a duty to be like, well, why was that the case? Like why would a poet like Marinetti create fascism, right? Why did that seem like a good idea? And conversely, like, why are there no serious, I don't know, like right-wing poets now? Because there's not. So I'm sorry, like there's no meaningful right-wing art, and there hasn't been for a very long time, but there was in the past. Even someone like Chesterton, who, I mean, the book that you just the recent book I just put out, the title is a quote from Chesterton, right?
Aristocracy of Weak Nerves.
It's a quote from Chesterton, right? And I obviously disagree with Chesterton about almost everything, but I mean, he's certainly a great writer.
So he was a right-wing writer?
Yeah. He's a right-wing Catholic writer from the 20s and 30s.
Do these labels, like, does right-wing apply to the context of 1929? Like, it just means a completely different thing in some ways, right?
It's a good question. And
like, it's the same way how, like, the Democrats were pro-slavery way back when, right? Well, like, these things just shift and rotate on themselves. Like,
they do. And again, like, engaging with a lot of this material directly, I was reading the Fascist Manifesto a few weeks ago, and one of the first things I was thinking is
by Marinetti
and Mussolini,
and
right?
Mussolini,
yeah.
okay.
And one of the first things I was saying is that if you just remove the word fascism, like in the present, like the platform they present, a lot of leftists would be really
Agree
excited.
with,
They would really agree with it because,
right.
again, remember, this is like very early 20th century, right?
Yeah.
They're saying women must have the vote.
Mhm.
The voting age must be lowered. The retirement age must be lowered.
Right.
Social programs are good. Workers need to have rights. You know, like labor union type trade organizations and workers organizations need real social power
Right.
in order to protect their workers, right? So I'm reading this and I'm thinking, wow, like this is like if you
Right.
okay, so
Yeah.
so it's not as, and this is why I hate when people just genericize this word fascism.
Right.
So I'm like, this is specific. This is a very specific historical program.
Yeah. It's not
like,
just someone you
it's
don't
not just someone like,
don't like or
well,
disagree
that's just
with.
stupid.
Or,
I mean, like just using it to mean bad is
Right.
like fucking stupid. Like,
well,
so,
again, this is the like CIA like changing the meaning of
I don't know
words.
what to, yeah. So
like
I don't know what to say about this. I mean, I
double
always,
plus on good.
yeah.
Like
I always have like a mental breakdown anytime I hear people misusing this word.
or like Nazi now, right?
Well, yeah, and I think there's a writer called this gets a bit subtle because I would blame Umberto Eco, the writer, for generic. So he wrote this like very influential analysis of fascism, which okay, there's some truth to, but he also, I think it in practice it also really contributed to this like super genericizing of the idea. And again, Eco is an Italian writer, so he's I think he knew what he was doing, but it's still very. I think it's had this quite lasting negative effect of like creating this like magical, ahistorical, generic fascism, which is just like evil, basically, right? I'm like, okay, like it doesn't just mean evil, right? It is a very specific historical political program,
Right.
that. Well, I was talking about this with Brendan, and like he said something like it's like if you called like some South American tribesman like a social democrat. It's like
Yeah.
what is it like? What
Yeah.
like you can't just like throw some term out of context and
yeah. I feel like this is just some like neoliberal like mental illness, basically.
Well, they like
where like you contextualize everything in like 1980s.
Well, they I mean they do this with
terms.
they do that like to give the other side, like they do this with socialism too, where like you see like
fair point.
Republicans will be like, oh, like, you know, not spanking your kids is sheer socialism. It's like what? Like what can that possibly, like they're using it to just mean bad,
right?
And again, that's a very CIA invention, right? Because like you have to have the magical Satan socialism, or
well, it's just
even worse, communism. You can't possibly, the ultimate evil is it's like an evil empire of communism, right? So
and I mean, just to build on this even further, conspiracy theorists, we've mentioned this before, 1970s word invented by the CIA, again, to like basically stop any questioning of narratives, of the official narrative, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot to dig into there, and I think people should question this kind of stuff. And I even I think I did bring this up during the roundtable. I said, okay, like if you're not going to give people actual fascism because remember, fascism means unity, right? That's what, like, the fasces are like the sticks wrapped together for strength, right? So if you're not
same root as like muscle fascia,
fasces, right? Yeah. So if you're not going to give people, you know, unity and order, well, then what more compelling thing are you going to give them? It's a good question.
Well, I often think back. Sorry, do you want to finish that thought?
I was just saying, I mean, trying to pose that question, which I think is an important question. I mean, I think if you're just presuming the alternative is like some magical, undiscussable evil,
Yeah.
then you're not going to end up with a ridiculous position, which is not going to convince anyone. It might silence people, but I don't think it's going to convince anyone really.
Yeah.
So if you look at it honestly, then you can maybe discuss a better alternative, right?
Yeah. Like what I think back to, and maybe you want to reformulate this better, but the rhetorical question you pose basically is, why aren't you a fascist?
Well, yeah, certainly,
right?
And that's a question I would pose to everyone.
Yeah,
I would say if you look at it, then, why would you not be, right? If you're and certainly
like,
I think
expand on that a bit. Like why
well, I think
why
like,
should fascism be compelling in this theoretical?
Well, okay, like so again, including not only the original programs they proposed, but just in practice, I mean, again, if you retitled it like, I don't know, Homelandism or something, and you just presented the program to the average American, I think they would need no convincing.
Right.
They'll just be like, yeah, sign me up. Okay, like clear order, unity, law and order, which is always a very popular phrase.
Well, it's like, what are the values? You enumerated it quite clearly last time, I believe. It's like courage, sacrifice, like blood, bravery, soil, bravery, right? Unity, law and order,
right?
Like
strength,
right? Yeah.
So again, if you're gonna convince people these are downsides of some kind,
right,
it's gonna take some doing. I mean, you certainly can, but I mean, what alternatives are you gonna? Well, you're also gonna. Okay, so I think the immediate objection is like, well, okay, but what about the out group, right? What about the person that doesn't fit in, or what about the, I don't know, minority or foreigner or whatever, right? Okay, and that's a good objection, but I guess the retort to that is, well, then what? But like, why would we care about the out group if we're not the out group? And I also think that's a serious question, which a lot of people brush under the table to their detriment, right? Because if you're not presenting some reason for why that would be a concern over something like ethno-nationalism, right? Which, again, I think is instinctively popular worldwide.
Well, on just a completely primal, fundamental, neurological level that is inescapable.
If you have,
basically.
I mean, if you have an in-group, then correspondingly, you're going to have, by definition, an out-group, right?
Right.
So, and that's like all we've done for all of history.
Yeah.
So it's going to take a bit of imagination to conceptualize things which present anything else, right?
I mean, like, if you can add cooperation to that list of fascist values, then you actually have a pretty strong platform, right? Because if you can cooperate with the out-group, right? Which would be another country or, minorities within your country,
one of the problems where this gets into in practice is that, again, fascism, if you look at their further programs and platforms, is government. I think they define it as, and I could be complete. I'm sure there's like some history specialists that are gonna pull me up on this if anyone cares, but
sound off in the comments.
Yeah. So I think they eventually did go on and define it as government, either government sponsorship or government collusion or collaboration with corporate interests for the purpose of basically empire. So like nationalist expansion and growth, right? So there's certainly an imperial, like there is the understated, well, not at the time, it certainly wasn't very understated, but I guess the flip side is that it does presume some kind of like imperial expansionist structure, which again, like Russia follows that in practice, whether it, and the United States under, again, the CIA has also been doing this in practice.
Right.
but not in theory, I guess.
Right,
So,
yeah.
so I guess
they're expanding democracy.
yeah, they're
right?
sharing. They're sharing
yeah.
democracy, right?
Sharing the joys of McDonald's.
Sharing the joys of neoliberalism, right?
Yeah.
So again, like every super state since World War II has done this in practice, but I guess not in theory.
Right.
So, but the fascists were just upfront about it.
Right.
They're like, yeah, we're honest. This is what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to move into Ethiopia, take it over, develop it.
Right.
Italy is going to keep growing. We're going to keep expanding our business model.
Right.
Right. So, but again, I guess the retort to that is like, well, in practice, everyone is actually doing this anyway.
Right.
So then who are you to criticize us for being honest about it?
Right.
If you're doing it anyway, right? Israel is doing this. The United States is doing this. Russia, like, so, right?
Yeah.
So I guess maybe I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here, but I guess if you were to defend fascism in that sense, you could say, well, like, your country is doing it too. Like, aren't you kind of a hypocrite by singling out fascism for doing this when the United States certainly does this, right?
Yeah.
So it's another, well, I mean, and I think that is another reason why it would be popular if you just presented it to the average American, who again probably doesn't particularly care about political correctness, and probably would enjoy seeing, you know, more countries be, I don't know, Americanized or turned into colonies, or what was Trump talking about, like turning Canada into the next
51st state or whatever.
Yeah, the Gulf of America and
Denmark and
yeah.
Greenland,
So these are very
Panama.
These are also very easy ideas to popularize, and like people will, you know, like the not terribly politically correct rando citizen is going to be excited about these ideas, right? Well, look at the response to World War II when they did some, I think, like right after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they did some poll of the American public, and like, you know, just asking how they like felt about it, and like I think there was
bombings.
Like, like there's this significant portion of the respondents said, not only do we approve, but we want to drop more atomic bombs. Like, can you guys produce even more? And like, just like, we just want total nuclear proliferation, right? And we just want to go ham with these nuclear weapons. This is like a real opinion that is coming in, right? So, what are you supposed to do with that? I mean, a lot of people believe that or would be excited about that. So, food for thought, I guess. I don't know where to take it from there.
I don't know how to. I don't know how to land that.
Hopefully, we've raised some complexities, or maybe brought up some kind of take that would at least get people to think. Maybe. We're at an hour 8. We'd probably call it there.
Yeah. Do you think we cut the beginning, or do you think we just go from the beginning? We kind of ramped up on this one, so I hope people listen through, because I think we probably just leave. I mean, it's fine. We certainly got into some meaty topics, I guess, which I hope people stuck around.
Hope people stick around, and anyone that's been listening to all of these, stay tuned, and hopefully it's been rewarding, or there's been some kind of follow through.
Let us know what you think. Like, comments or feedback welcome. This is a two-way street.
So I guess we'll just do the usual links.
Let's do it.
Justin Isis one on Elon Musk. I think we just call the platform that. We just call it Musk or something.
Musk.com.
Justin Isis 93 on Zuckerberg. We have all the Blue Sky things and stuff. Discord. There's Discord now. Neo Decadence. There's Blue Sky. Is
I mean, if you're trying to get into the Neo Decadent Discord, you'd probably need to go through the Facebook group or something, right?
We could probably provide a link or something, maybe, or message. I think we're on pretty much every platform at the present, including Substack.
Substack, Neo-Passeism.
We'll be posting more of that to come soon. So
Cool. Yeah, and
Hooray.
DBLV on Instagram. Yeah, thanks everyone.
All right.
Have a good week. Catch
Take
you next
care.
time.